And indeed, comparing this topic, Turkey somehow looks very surprising in this matter because it is between the West and the East. It seems to be an Eastern country, but nevertheless, let's say, such a, I don't know, buffer, not a migrant buffer. Well, yes, a corridor. Moreover, the Turks themselves also have a lot of migrants. Local elections were held there recently, which, well, probably, the emigrant issue also influenced them, including, in general, no matter how hard they tried, with all the financial problems and some other, representatives of the ruling party of Erdogan could not appease, build there, raise salaries, give something, somehow influence somewhere. The opposition won. Even one of the leaders who defeated the opposition died. He died rejoicing on the balcony because he fell off here. What do you say about? Of course. Yes. What do you say about the Turkish approaches and this loss of Erdogan? What does it mean? Oh well. As for the Turkish approaches to migration, to be honest, I just don't know anything, so I won't say anything. I will not deceive you directly, and in general, I will say bluntly that I am not the greatest expert on Turkey. The only thing I can fix is that we see, in some sense, inevitable friction, because political ambitions, especially the geopolitical ambitions of Erdogan, are very large, and he has relatively few resources under this geopolitical ambitions. Because of his geopolitical ambitions, and he has a lot, he is simultaneously trying to implement two projects. That is, as if the great Ottoman Empire of the Mediterranean Sea is a movement to Cyprus, Greece, Palestine, and Tehran. That is, well, you know, for a country with a Turkish population and a Turkish economy, it would be like pulling one. But then he swung at two, yes. Accordingly, well, we all know how big the economic ones were in Turkey. Economic problems still persist. We all know Turkish inflation, which conditionally cosmically reaches just indicators. We all know this economic tension. That is, on the one hand, there seems to be a lot of industrial development, but really, that is, he sent, as it were, erectors, the construction of a fleet. There are many great achievements on the other hand. Obviously, for the population, it pays a very high price for this, and Erdogan cannot find insufficient compensation. If we talk about this topic, in other words, it is obvious that he failed to find some kind of external resource, conditionally billions or $500, just to soften this stage of the transition. And because of this, it came, but this political one, let's say. Well, how is it right to say it? Well, not payback, it's too loud, but the price. In other words, let's say he brought this political price. I think that the process looks like this at such a superficial level, but there is no way behind some deep details inside Turkish politics. I just remembered Turkey for some reason, in the context of migrants and the topics that we raised above, are international terrorism. After all, these terrorists and several camps in Ukraine were taken there. Well, in this sense, you need to know the geography of Turkey. There are a lot of territories where you can do this, yes. There, for example, the border with Cancer, with Kurdistan, the border with Iraq, they are generally in a very leaky composition. That is, well, it's not surprising, this is a big problem. In other words, as if yes, the problem of terrorism is relevant for Turkey, it is not going anywhere. That is, it's just that if we do, well, get on the rails of the fact that we need to fight this and do something, and not accept it as energy, a flame that, as it were, it appeared. It won't. No one will fight this. This is also his problem. So if it is beneficial to customers, this is too convenient a tool for customers, and that's why I recommended the film. This is how you will deal with what you yourself have created. So you know, the most important thing during the investigation is not to come out on yourself. But here's the same principle. How, relatively speaking, will the special services deal with what they did not create themselves? And if we assume again that there will be some kind of epic agreement between all the special services of the world, that we are no longer doing this, but some kind of earth is more likely to fly into the firmament of heaven. Here, I am starting from this here. Listen, and then an interesting question arises in general. Do politicians run the secret services, or do the secret services run the politicians? Likewise. In other words, it's such a corporate game, let's call it that. That is, according to the situation. Somewhere alone, somewhere in different matters in different ways. That is, very much. No, oh, but very often deeply. Very often we know cases when the special services, in fact, act on their own. And this is also the price for the creation of the UN. And this is also the price for excluding the system of international relations. As soon as you have excluded the system of international relations, you have only excluded the word, but the tension itself, the friction itself, the conflicts themselves between states will not go away. So they simply move from the open sphere to the sphere, relatively speaking, in the special services. And the practices of the Secret Service and its mentality, its anthropotype, if the anthropotype is a Secret Service agent, it is qualitatively different from the anthropotype of a warrior general. It's just two different anthropotypes. Again, got it like this. Is that what they were fighting, what is called? Just again, if, well, let's do this. If there is a special services war, yes, or there is a special services war, then why then wars in this sense of the front line? As we understand and see now, well, directly in the world and here in Ukraine.
Понимаем и видим сейчас, непосредственно в мире и в Украине, где-то часть...
The Secret Services would prefer. Well, how is it, depending on which special services? That is, for the Secret Service, a triangle, a square for four. For the special services of country A, the most beautiful thing is for the BC country to fight with each other. They thereby incur damage. That's the answer. That is, as if there is still a big benefit from this. And not all of them, after all. That is, again, they are not omnipotent. That is, we are leaving again. We may have created some kind of omnipotent image. They are not omnipotent. They seem to make mistakes in the same way. They create some mistakes in the same way. And the main fundamental nature of international relations is that, well, his service could not solve everything among themselves. That is, you will not get off with one war of the special services. Sooner or later, it will turn into a hot war. That's it. In other words, this is the nature of international relations. A striking case, as it were, was like this. A very interesting speech was caught on video by the American Republican Congressman Tim Walberg. He communicated with people and actually gave out in a hurry that it was necessary to finish everything quickly, as in Hiroshima. I had in mind the situation, well, in Israel, Gaza, and in Ukraine. Then, as if, well, apparently publicity or it got into the network, he began to, well, let's say, take back his words, explain something that he didn't mean that. But so on the video, it was clear and clear what he wanted to say in principle. The word is not a sparrow. Everything was clear. All that is said afterwards is already, well, like details, the milk is exciting. Tell me, is there a chance that it is possible to end up in Gaza and Ukraine like this on Hiroshima? Here to take and finish. Well, in theory it is possible, of course. Well, what kind of madness is it? It is extremely difficult to predict it. But for me, of course, it was not a serious statement. First of all, he is an elderly man. This is clearly a man of the old American mindset, who believes in all the forces of America. When he received the school of the American finger, I don't know, everyone can solve almost anything in the world. That is, well, clearly a person from this generation spoke. In reality, of course not. It's just elementary. In order to resolve something peak on Hiroshima, you need to be the only owners of a nuclear arsenal. But, even in these conditions, any attempt by the United States to resolve something to Hiroshima will lead to death. Well, with the death of both the USA and the planets, well, perhaps, like a planet and other things, that is unacceptable damage. Therefore, most likely it is, well, to be honest, it seems to me frankly, this elderly congressman, he got a little carried away in his story. You know well how this person gets carried away. That is, he was absolutely sincere in this matter when he spoke, but he said it without thinking, and seriously does not reflect it. In other words, this is, relatively speaking, not a speech by Karaganov. In other words, this is not a serious article in an analytical journal, which, relatively speaking, contains logic, prescribed approaches, and so on and so forth. It was a speech in front of, I repeat, such a rather closed, specific audience of a rather elderly congressman who, apparently, misses the times of American omnipotence. Well, as it is, I would interpret it this way, and in order not to frighten people more than necessary, then yes, indeed, the quote has dispersed, everyone has strained very much, and that's why I am. So, okay, I'll clarify the question. Look, there was a shelling of the mission in Gaza. Netanyahu had to admit guilt and say that he would apologize and say that this would not happen again. Well, it's a tragedy really. It's kind of like this. It is clear
Понятно,
that
что
this
это
is
нет
not the
никакого
wrong
масштаба.
scale,
Но
but
есть ли
is
масштаб
there a scale of
трагедии,
the
который
tragedy
заставит
that will make you stop and stop?
остановиться и прекратить
Isn't there one
ту
or
или
the other
другую войну?
war? No,
Нет,
no.
нет.
Just not. Well, I'm sorry, you asked a direct question, a direct answer. If we talk about, again, there is a very simple criterion, an existential type of conflict. This is part of, again, even the modern theory of international relations, by the way, the American one, invented by Barry Busan, that if a conflict passes into an existential stage, that is, when existence itself becomes threatened, then no, then all these fig leaves of international law again go aside. Once again, I am very worried, to be honest, about this false naivety, which is sold by a lot of speakers, mainly, by the way, in the West. This is what really would be if it wasn't for this aggressive American military, or aggressive Russian military, or not aggressively. In general, substitute any. That is, in general, an aggressive military, then in fact we would all be like smart people, we would just sit down peacefully, would not agree against the background of these human ones. But that's a lie. It's just a direct lie that creates, frankly, false people, false hopes. In a conflict of a social type, it is impossible to agree. In an existential type of conflict, only surrender is possible. Capitulation is not about negotiating. Higher. Therefore, if we talk, for example, about the example of Israel, for Israel, this conflict is existential. Either he wins this conflict, or he will not be. That's how the state in the form in which it is, it will not be. Whatever tragedies of the Israelis would not have been carried out, they are not big enough to stop the policy that Israel is pursuing. About the same thing is happening now between Russia and Ukraine. These are distential conflicts. In such conflicts, it is impossible to just stop shooting. I'm sorry for this hackneyed quote. Again, going back to Israel, you can think as much as you like that the United States can just stop Israel at the click of a finger. Again, if it were a conflict of some type there, I do not know, well, around a really small piece of a water tower there, it does not matter, yes, or there is money, then it would be possible. But now the conflict is not of this type. With a blow to Damascus, it has now shown that it is ready to escalate to the limit, including, by the way, up to the nuclear limit, I think, because it's an existential question. In an existential conflict, you are willing to pay any price. And here, it shows very well what I now call, I'm sorry, I'm introducing a new concept, the principle of cousins in international relations. What is the Kusita principle in international relations? This is that the US government only works for cowards. If a person or a political entity simply ceases to be afraid, and these are all actions, then the entire power of the United States, and as a proxy of the UN, international law, and other things, becomes powerless. Remember, you
Помните
didn't do
логичность?
anything.
В
Songs
детстве
were
в
sung
песне
in the
пели.
song. The
Тормоза
brakes were
придумали
invented
трусы,
by
да?
cowards, right? Well, sort of. But the important principle here is that, well, with 600 warnings, the Sith were bombed and what? Nothing. The same can be done with Israel. You can start withdrawing 500,000 sanctions against him. Even now, he won't stop. And that is the key element, psychology. That is, if Netanyahu is by his action, well, or his entourage, that is, for some reason, it seems to me that this is already. In other words, there is a very big lie spreading in the United States now, you know too, like there is an evil Netanyahu, an extremely radical, but in fact, his entourage, there are moderate people there. They call the name of a type of Benegan, the chief of the Israeli staff, and now they are moderate. And now we are going to remove Netanyahu, and a good moderate will come, and he will completely bite. Yes, no one will agree there. Pentagon, there is complete unity on this issue. That is, as it were. That is, it is also false. Sorry, an illusion about Netanyahu said. In other words, the same Benegans. He is no less consistent with his pro-Israel policy and readiness to pursue it to the end. If the Israeli leadership has now crossed this critical bar of fear, that is, it has simply stopped being afraid, and the Russian leadership, by the way, has also crossed it, then it's too late to do anything. In other words, it was again a very fragile system that was based on a lot of illusions. But the Pusita principle shows that the most important trick is a trick in the head. As soon as you stop being afraid, the enemy ceases to be strong against you. Really not. Well, there's kind of this. It is correct to say that there is a cost from this. It's for the words you have to answer. In other words, Israel shows by raising rates that it is ready to respond, and he is ready to take responsibility for his actions. But if you are ready to be responsible for your actions, you are not afraid, then you become a subject, a real subject.